Hello YouTube! Welcome to my channel. My name is Courtney and this is Courtney in Books. I have invisible hair in my mouth. I'm also trying different lighting today. Usually I have the overhead light on my fan, but it's like really yellow lighting. So I'm trying something new and I just have the blue like ring light on my face, and then I also have the window open. So I can't really see my actual camera because the ring light is like kind of bright, but hopefully in editing this looks better. All right, let's get started on today's video. Also, you guys, I smell amazing. Talking about somebody that I met at Ren Fair this year who was absolutely amazing and helped me make these bookish scents. So these are oils, these are like perfume oils, and my fiance and I made them at one of the booths at Ren Fair this year, and they are all based on different characters from my books. This one is Piper from Hollow Beast, and it is Rose, Fern, and Earth. Now, I told the lady when we went there what this character was about, what she smelled like, what her lifestyle was like, and she created this scent and it smells so amazing. This is exactly what I imagined Piper smelling like, and I love it, and I just hope I don't run out before next year so I can get some more. And this sounds like a sponsorship, but I swear to God, I am not getting paid for this or anything. I'm not big enough to get sponsorships outside of myself. Anyways, they roll on, so like, if you unscrew it, it has a little roller, and I don't want to put this one on because I already put Genesis on, but yeah, anyways, they're amazing, and maybe in the future when I get big enough, they will sponsor me, because that would be amazing, because I'm going to get all my book characters and I'm going to tell everyone about them. Okay, so let's talk about the video's real sponsor, which is me. If you didn't know already, I am an indie author. I have self-published about 20 to 22 books at this point, and I have many more to come. So if you haven't checked me out, I am on Amazon. Most of my books are on Kindle Unlimited and available in paperback. So what this video is actually about today is world building. So if you haven't seen my character building video already, which I did a couple months back, then I highly suggest watching that. I am not going to say that everything I say is exactly how you should do it. I don't think that anybody's advice should be followed to an absolute T, but these are things that worked for me. These are things that I've gone over multiple times. These are things that I've tried to polish myself in my own writing. And hopefully by releasing this video and talking to you guys, anybody who's out there that is a aspiring author who wants to get their works published or wants to publish themselves on Amazon the way I did, that you know, my only hope is that maybe this is helpful, or at least makes you think about certain things that you may not have been thinking about before. So why is world building important? Well, world building is basically the setting of your story. If you don't have a specific world, if you don't have the development that you need in a world that you're writing about, then it's really difficult for readers to be immersed in the book. You can follow a character around and watch what they're doing and experience their adventures, but the world around them is always going to affect what they do and how they do them to some degree. So building a world that is believable, a world that is well polished, is, in my opinion, a very significant part of building a really good story. The first thing that you want to decide is which aspects of the world do you want to focus on the most, or which aspects of the world are most important to you. So, for example, and I'm going to be using my books as examples. I'm not saying my books are the best books in the world. I think they're decent, but you know, I'm the author, I have to say that. But I do think they're decent, and I think I did a decent job in most of my books in building a world or building a setting for the characters. So, for example, the most important parts in, say, Hollow Beast, I really wanted to illustrate that this was a very dark and dreary world where people were not treated well by themselves and by other people. People were not very understanding of each other. People were very divided. There was a lot of sadness and a lot of darkness in the world of Hollow Beast. There was the town where Piper resided. There were a lot of people with a lot of deep, traumatic, emotional wounds, all dealing with their own darkness at the same time, and I wanted to portray that. So my world was very dark. It was always cloudy. It just sort of helped to set the mood. The colors were very muted. Not a huge fan of Tim Burton. Don't at me about that. I'm not a big Tim Burton fan, but when I think of those kind of muted tones and those kind of dark tones, I do think of Tim Burton. So I was thinking a little bit on that side of things when I was creating this world and figuring out what colors and what what architecture and what kind of weather I wanted to put into the book. So that was really important to me, but other books, you know, have different really important aspects to them. And that's something that you have to decide as a writer, what you want to put in there, what you really want to push to readers. Then you really want to decide what genre you're writing. Are you writing fantasy? Are you writing dystopian, apocalyptic, sci-fi? Some of these genres might require different approaches, such as if you're writing a sci-fi novel, you really want to do a little bit of research, because science fiction is typically backed up like loosely by some sort of realism. You know, how spaceships work or how these different devices work. Things like that really put readers in the moment and really creates like this alternate reality for them. I know that a big reason why I enjoy sci-fi over fantasy, like 70% of the time, it just feels more real to me. Whereas a lot of times in fantasy, you don't need the same justifications or explanations for things. Magic is magic, kind of thing, you know? Unicorns exist, but we don't know why. There's no scientific reason behind it. And there is something to be said about that. But with science fiction, I always find it's better if you know a little bit about the subject you're writing so that it seems more believable. Even if your explanation of something is entirely wrong and entirely unrealistic, as long as we, the readers, feel like it is real, I feel like that makes a good science fiction sort of setting. Whereas again, in fantasy, you don't really need to hear the science behind spell casting or mythical creatures existing. It just kind of is. And when it comes to something like a dystopian future or a dystopian government, you might need to really research how different governments throughout history worked and try to take inspiration from that and really get a political system that would fit in a dystopian setting. The next thing I want to talk about is culture. Culture is one of the funnest things for me to write into books because you can pull from so many different things in real life and kind of create your own. Does your world have a religion or beliefs? Do they believe in one god? Do they believe in multiple gods? Do they entirely believe in science? And by putting those religions in your book, does that mean that people have religious customs? Do they have different moral compasses according to what their beliefs are? Do they treat people differently? What things in their lifestyle and what habits are based on their religious beliefs, if any? And are there multiple religions in different regions or different territories in your book? And do those different territories have having different beliefs affect the way that they interact with each other if those two cultures end up clashing? These kind of things can be a really good basis for a lot of different stories. Are they at war? Will characters meet people from different territories and interact certain ways because of their beliefs? It sets up a really good base for pretty much all storytelling if you can get all of these things locked in early on in your story. And that's sort of a good segue into language. So do these different regions have different languages? Does this create language barriers? Is it something that you need to focus on enough to make a dictionary for? There are a couple of books that I have written that I have actually made dictionaries for. I have my elf books, there is a made-up language in that book, but it's spoken so... I have my elf books, there is a made-up language in that book, but it's spoken so rarely that I have not really developed it. It's more like I develop a sentence and they speak it and then I never reference that sentence again. There are certain words that I repeat in different languages, but it's never been to the point where I felt like I needed to make a dictionary. When it comes to Genesis, perhaps my most developed world to date, my longest book, I plan to make that series a very long series. It's just taking a very long time for me to write them because they're very detailed. And I do apologize because I know there are people asking about book 2 in that series and it has taken years for me to even get to the point where I am. Mind you, the first book did take me 10 years, so... But anyways, there is a dictionary in Genesis. It is not something that I released to like the public. It's not something that I published, but I do have it in my possession. And it's detailed enough to where I was almost able to learn a lot of the language that I created. And I was trying to urge my fiance to learn it with me, but we just didn't have time to learn a language that didn't exist, I guess. So it's really up to you how in-depth you want to go when it comes to language. There are a lot of books like Lord of the Rings, which has an entire Elven dictionary, and there are a lot of other books out there that have these other languages and have built completely different languages for their books. Again, you don't have to do that. It's all up to you how deep you want to get into your world building, but I personally find it so intriguing when an author can create an entire language and insert that into their world, because that is just so much, that is so much immersion to me. So if you have the patience for that, and if it is significant, if it helps you, I think it's really interesting and it's a really cool exercise to learn and create different languages. That was a lot. On my notes, my part talking about languages is like one sentence, and I just went off on a tangent as usual. What about you? Don't you have another language? Maybe she would if she talked. History. So history is very important when you are building an intricate world. Sometimes it helps to build the history of your world before you start writing the book. The history doesn't necessarily have to be talked about in detail in your book, but it helps you as an author to build certain events, certain directions that things go based on the history of your world. Was there a war at some point that created a certain town that wasn't there before? Or did it leave landmarks that weren't there before? Is it the reason that people worship certain people in your book, or the reason people remember certain people, or the reason that there are monuments to certain things? When you have a history in your book, then we can believe that place actually exists. The current state of things always has something to do with the history. Some authors have written thousands and thousands of years of history that is barely, if mentioned at all, in their books, but they have it there. And it's like, you know, if you ever asked about it, it's there. And again, that history doesn't have to be mentioned in detail when you are writing your book, but it can always be referenced as you're writing the story. Environment. This is probably the easier and yet also a very significant part of world building. What is the environment like? What are the colors like? What is the weather like? What is the temperature like? This might affect what characters eat, because depending on what their environment is like, that dictates what kind of food is available. It dictates what kind of clothes they wear, what the materials that their clothes are made of, or the type of architecture they use. All of that sort of ties into what the environment is like. I was born on Saipan, which is a very tiny island in Northern Marianas near Guam. And most of the houses, a lot of people actually lived in huts during the time that I was born there anyways. But a lot of the houses were built on stilts because the island was an island, and it was a very small island that was prone to storms and flooding. So a lot of houses were built on stilts to avoid the effects of heavy flooding. So things like that could really tie into your story. Do they live in a place with lots of storms, a lot of wetness, like, you know, swamps, or do they live in a place with a lot of snow? You know, all of these things can tie into a lot of different aspects of your book. Is it cold? Is it green? Is it dry and deserty? Is it apocalyptic? Were there things before, but they just aren't there anymore, but aspects or signs of them do still exist? That sort of thing. I had to do this particularly for Genesis, which is a post-apocalyptic world where alien tech has destroyed the natural ecosystem, which means that the terrain is very difficult to traverse and there are no big cities or no big civilizations anymore. So that would, for example, greatly affect what sort of resources are available to people traveling in that environment. And again, this kind of goes really smoothly into fashion. What do people wear in your world? I've written a lot of different books and I've read a lot of different books, but I'm speaking from an author perspective. I've written a lot of books where their fashion differs drastically depending on where they are and what the weather is like, what the culture is like, all of these things. It dictates the color of their clothing, how much coverage there is, and that could be for religious reasons or for temperature reasons. What materials they use in their fashions. You know, you wouldn't be in a desert setting and wear like furs. You know, if it's really hot out, you'd wear cotton and linen and things that are breathable. The opposite of that, if you are living in a snowy region or a very cold region, you're not going to be wearing some thin silk dress. You're going to be wearing something very practical. Once more, I am using Genesis as an example because it is probably one of the most developed worlds that I have written so far. And I knew that clothing wasn't something that was in regular production anymore, seeing as the majority of the population no longer existed. So most of the fashion was practical, it was handmade, or it was very, very old. And in one of my fantasy books, the weather was very cold. But a class system meant that only the rich had fur for clothing. So there are small things like that that really change the tone of your book and kind of kind of make it more realistic. We have food. What do your characters eat? And is it something that is based in culture, or is it something based in what is available to them in this setting? This goes along with fashion in the sense that food is something that changes depending on its availability. A coastal region might eat a lot of fish. It might be one of the primary incomes for their town too, if they're trading fish to other regions that don't have fish readily available. Again, in Genesis, I had to think about things that were available for somebody in a very desolate setting where game wasn't really around very much, and where people were traveling long periods of time in environments that really didn't yield a lot of resources. So I had to wonder what a person would find if they visited a town once every few weeks to a couple months. So when they did resupply, they would probably have stuff that was easy to keep for long periods of time. So Genesis ate a lot of crackers, and she ate a lot of dried meat like jerky, and she ate a lot of dried fruits. Do different classes eat different things in your books? Do the peasants eat different things than the high class? Does religion dictate what certain people eat, or how they eat it, or when they can eat it? These are all questions that you can ask. You don't have to, but you can. And they're all things that will just help to keep readers immersed in your world. Time to talk about the government system in your book. So this is something that I find very difficult because I hate talking about it in my books, but a lot of times it is very significant when it comes to stories. Some reference to how the government works always makes things more believable. And again, referencing Genesis, it was a little bit easier because there wasn't really a government. There were small aspects of them when you arrived in towns or colonies or things like that. But it was very, very different, and it was not something that greatly impacted the story. But other books that I've written, like my elf books, do have references to governments. My dragon books have heavier references to political aspects and things that affect the progression that these characters make. Not all books have a strong connection to a government system, so yours does not have to. Is there a king or queen? Do different regions, cities, or even planets have different governments? Do they have different laws? Do they have different rulers? A couple things that really help me build my world or help me write and get inspired are building playlists on YouTube that I can play in the background while I'm writing. If you're somebody that writes in the silence, that's totally cool, totally fine, but I am someone that needs sound, and that doesn't mean TV's playing in the background because that's really distracting, but if I get a playlist of songs that I really, really like, or I feel elevate my world building and elevate my imagination, then I will listen to that music pretty much all the time, and I have playlists for every single book that I have written. I also use Pinterest to make boards that I think fit the mood of my books, and that also really helps me because sometimes if I'm in a slump, and I will revisit those lists, and it will kind of help to reinvigorate my imagination. Lastly, I want to talk about some do's and don'ts. When it comes to building a world, having a fleshed out environment, a fleshed out universe is a must. But avoid info dumping. Info dumping is extremely easy to do when you have this massive world built out and you just want to tell people about it. But one of the absolute worst things that you can do as a writer is to just dump all the information on a person in page one. We don't want that. As a reader, I am as much a reader as I am an author, and as a reader, I have DNF'd so many books that just wanted to dump all the information on me at once. As readers, we do not retain that information if it is all thrown in our face. It's like throwing a pie in someone's face, and like all that cream and stuff is like melting off their face, and they don't retain all that, you know, that's gone. That was a weird analogy. Anyways, the way to give people the information that you want them to have is to trickle it in throughout the story in times that it is significant. You as an author put so much time and so much thought into that universe. It is so easy to want to tell everybody everything about it because you're so proud of it. And you should be. You should absolutely be proud of it. But you're going to lose readers if you just throw it at them like that. You're going to lose them so fast. And me as a reader, I know because I have put books down before that I couldn't handle the amount of information being thrown at me all at once. I lost interest. I couldn't retain it. I didn't know where the story was going, and it just doesn't work. But mentioning things in passing as they come up is a much more effective way to get readers interested and to keep their attention. Because readers are smarter than you think. You know, I always have this urge to just describe things so much in my books, but then I think about it and I'm like, readers are so smart. A lot of readers read so many books and we are accustomed to figuring these things out and putting things together, and it actually is why we get so interested in books half the time, because we enjoy unfolding and unwrapping the gift. The world you build is there to exist around the characters that you were talking about. It isn't really meant to be the center of attention. Unless it is. Maybe it is. But most of the time, the world isn't the center of attention, the story and the characters are. The world is just the place that they are doing all of their things in. The place where their adventure is taking place. It's meant to elevate the other aspects of your story, so as easy as it is to do this, don't overdo it. Build your world, sprinkle bits of it in there when it needs to be said or when it's significant, and the rest very well may be in storage somewhere where readers don't even see it, but you as an author sees it and is able to reference it now and then when you are writing your book. That is all I have for you guys today. I hope you really enjoyed this. I will maybe have a little outline like I did for my last video on character development available for download below. If not, then I just didn't have time to do it, but I will be editing it. I will be adding it eventually on my website, on my blog, or in various places where you can download it. And it is just a reference sheet for you to see which questions to ask and things like that. Helps you outline certain things about your world building. It might help, it might not. If you don't want it, you don't want it. If you do, it'll be available at some point, and I will post about that probably on one of my social medias or here on YouTube. I do also want to re-mention that I do have shirts available for readers like this one, also available on my website, and other designs are coming. And buying my shirts and buying my books all go towards the channel and my future endeavors as an author. If you're not subscribed already, please subscribe below. I am trying to get to 600 subscribers, and unlike everything else that I try to do myself, I cannot do this alone. Leave a like, leave a comment if you have any thoughts on this video, and until next time, happy reading, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!